Welcome back to the Start and Scale podcast. I'm your host, Jack Brandwood, and in this series, we're diving headfirst into the world of tech with the people who are coding the future from the front lines. This is the place where we refactor the way you think about scaling tech teams, debugging their journeys, reviewing their stories, and pushing boundaries to ship better insights. Whether you're a seasoned techie who's seen your fair share of legacy code, an aspiring professional ready to deploy your skills, or just fascinated by the world of technology, this episode will give you unique insights and practical takeaways to add to your backlog.
Somebody imagines something in our world and then it gets made.
So grab your headphones, commit to this listen, and let's sprint into another episode. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Dave, thanks for coming on.
Hello.
Hello. Sorry,
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's you've never been to our offices before, have you?
No, this is the first time, so it's very interesting to have a look around and see what goes on.
The internal gubbins of a recruitment agency.
Right. So where the magic happens.
Where the magic happens. Yeah, exactly. Well, look, always like to start these ones with a really deep question.
Okay.
Who is Dave Manton?
I guess I'm just kind of a normal, maybe slightly geeky guy who just piddles around, messing about with a lot of stuff. So whether it's coding in the evenings and like making little side projects, or a bit of 3D printing, or recently I've been getting into retro gaming and trying to build my own little handheld games console and stuff like that.
Nice.
Just somebody who likes to mess around, learn a bunch of stuff and be a bit of a geek, I guess.
Love it. And I'm really excited to get into your journey to where you are now at Victorian. But you're head of architecture at Victorian Plumbing, aren't you?
Yes.
Great. But I'm excited to get into your journey as well as we go through this podcast, because you've got a bit of an interesting, squiggly, let's say,
you could call it that,
route to where you are now. And I think people find it really interesting. But I did kind of warn you that I was going to ask you to draw something, and you weren't always the head of architecture at Victorian Plumbing. And our vision here at Tact is to create a world where everyone gets their dream job. So, could you please draw what you wanted to be when you grew up?
All right. Did you want me to talk through this as I was going?
That'd be awesome if you can. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, when I was a kid, there were just loads of things going on. So, for a little while, I was... See, look, this is my shaky hands with the nerves.
Oh, don't worry. It's all in effect.
So, oops.
Good start.
There was a little while when I was really interested in space. So maybe I'd want to be like an astronaut or something like that. But then, I was also a bit of a geek. So I'd kind of maybe get into science for a while, or like engineering. So here's me in my lab coat. Got to have some pens in the pocket, I guess.
Of course, yeah.
Just finish off the detail here, I guess.
Yeah.
And then there was a weird phase, I suppose, as well, where I kind of wanted to be a chef. So here's me with my wooden spoon.
Wow.
I can't do hands, so we'll just call it there. And then, going to need another pocket there, obviously. And then, I suppose for a little while as well, like every kid wants to do it, they wanted to be a bit of a sports star.
Nice.
I used to play a lot of rugby when I was in school. So, here's me with my knobbly knees. There we go. Oh, yeah, I really am bad at drawing.
No, you know what? I think you did a fantastic job. You said you were bad, but it's turned out really, really well. I don't know how I'm going to explain to other people what this is.
There we go. And then, that's probably about it, I suppose. So just, the answer was I never really knew what I wanted to be. And so I wanted to be a little bit of everything.
Love that. Oh, fantastic.
So, yeah.
That's a great drawing. Whenever, to anyone listening, I always kind of explain to people or show them examples of people's drawings. And if someone asks me what that is, I'm going to be hard stuck to find a word for it. A space lab rugby player. There we go.
Don't forget the chef.
The chef. Yes, of course. Is there still hope?
What, the chef stuff? No, I'm
Chef,
terrible
rugby
at cooking.
No.
My wife would laugh at the very idea of put that on there.
So how did you get to where you are now as a head of architecture?
So that's the other thing, is that those things aren't even on there, I guess. So I went off to uni, and through a slightly circuitous route, I ended up studying philosophy and theology. And I did that because I was just really interested in people and problems and probably having an argument because I was young and stupid. And especially like philosophy, there's so much stuff around critical thinking, just hypotheticals. I mean, when I was in school, that was when the Matrix came out. So you can imagine how like that theory of mind and reality plays in and can capture your imagination. And I always think religion particularly has played such an interesting part of our history, in fact, the world's history, and continues to a large element. So that's a really interesting topic to study, even though I'm not religious at all myself. So I just went for something which engaged me, and I'd enjoy reading about, I suppose. Having finished that, then I went into recruiters with my philosophy and theology degree, and I got laughed out of the room because I went, well, what are you going to do with that? Which was a fair point.
I'm really good at thinking.
So I ended up going into teaching, because what else do you do when you've got a kind of one of those social sciences degrees that that has no particular practical purpose. I was a primary teacher for a good long while, which I really enjoyed. And I think was really good for me, because I think particularly when you're in your 20s, bit immature, quite stupid, having that sort of responsibility, the fact you've got to walk into a room and it doesn't matter how you're feeling, you've got to put that away because you've got 30, I think my biggest class was 38. 38 kids you've got to look after and guide and help shape their future. You just put it away, you get on with it, and there's a lot of work and a lot of responsibility that comes with that. So yeah, it was like gave me a good skill set and a good foundation to take on to other things. But eventually I got really sick of not being able to go to the toilet when I wanted. And having to mark in the evenings, being absolutely honest.
Yeah.
So I started looking for something else. And I'd been the IT coordinator. I'd coded as a hobby because I'm a bit geeky. I built our school's first website. Back in the days when Flash was a thing, I made a virtual tour of the school where we had a full 360 rotating images and that sort of stuff. And I'd make little computer games and did IT clubs and that sort of stuff. So I thought, this could be a career. And off I went. So I went and did a conversion master's at MMU in computing, and from there just started off into the world of development. So I've been doing it for about 8 years now, and this is my fourth job, although I've been here for quite a long time. 5 years at Victorian Plumbing, and it's just been a really good journey.
So conversion. So what did the conversion course entail?
So with these conversion courses, it's normally the idea is to take somebody from zero to hero, I suppose. So it's kind of like doing the last 2 years of a degree in the space of 1 year.
Wow.
And so that's what makes it master's credit level, I guess, as opposed to just a standard BSc. But then you can get through it in a year. Sort of like the university version of a boot camp, I suppose. And it took you from coding basics to advanced coding, but the end of it and a bunch of other things, loads of different problems to solve. And you have to do a master's level project at the end, so for your dissertation.
Did you do that part-time or full-time?
Yeah, so that year, that was full-time. I was working as a computing curriculum consultant, which I did 3 days a week. And then the actual uni lectures were 2 days a week. And so I was balancing that and working the evenings and at the weekends. That was also the year I got married.
Oh, well.
So we had a wedding to plan in about 3 months. And then, unfortunately, one of my grandparents died. So we were dealing with that, and then we got pregnant with our first child.
Oh God!
And so then we were remodeling the house as well. We didn't have a lot of money, so I was doing that myself and trying to balance all this. I still remember being about halfway through my dissertation, and Jen walks in and says, so I've ordered the kitchen. It's arriving tomorrow. You need to get rid of the existing kitchen. And you said you were going to fit it, right? So, yep.
Guess so.
Put that down and then started fitting this kitchen. And it was quite a whirlwind year. There's a lot going on.
Wow, I bet after that year you were kind of like,
oh, yeah. Well, and then we had our first child in the January after I'd just started my first job in the October, and then we had our first child in January. So trying to switch careers and balance a newborn who refused to sleep was a bit of a challenge.
So that first job in software engineering must have been a huge adjustment.
Yeah, it was huge. There was a whole bunch of things which I needed to let go of from my teaching life and think about how to approach differently. And then it was just a very different environment. You know, I was used to sort of walking into a room and closing the door, and it's me working with the kids, but suddenly I'm part of a team. So there's that getting used to, like pull requests and all this stuff, which I'd never heard of, because, you know, you don't when you're straight out of uni, and maybe some guys do now, but you didn't back then. So just a whole cycle of things to learn. And I went through a couple of jobs in fairly fast succession, because I started off in Java, and one of the things I really wanted to do was get into .NET, especially in the Manchester scene. I think that's a really big part of the local technology community.
I was going to say, why did you want to get into .NET? Was it because of the popularity of it, or was it more that you enjoyed doing it?
I think I just thought it was a very interesting stack to be part of.
Cool.
It looked like it was going to be good in the future, and the job market was great at the time as well. So I ended up moving on fairly quickly to We Buy Any Car, where I met Liam, who's now my current boss, and I got really lucky actually there, because I think it was a fantastic place to work at the time. And one of the first things that happened was I spent 2 weeks pairing with him.
Wow.
And we were doing TDD and basically developing, I think it was a notification subscriber. So it was about the comms system, so sending out emails, internal comms, all that sort of stuff. So it sounds a bit boring in terms of the topic, but to sit down with somebody and just work very, very closely together, especially somebody so knowledgeable, was that's where I really started to take off in my career. Is what set me off flying, because we'd just chat all day about all the questions that I had that I'd found difficult to ask before, and you know, whether it was about scaling or whether it was about code practice or database questions, and he just answered everything that I threw at him. So it was, fantastic experience.
Wow. And is it weird? And obviously you work with Liam now as well, right? Is it weird looking back on that now?
No, not really. I guess our conversations have changed, but we still bounce off each other solving problems. I guess the dynamic's a bit different, because probably he's now started to ask me more questions than I ask him in some ways. But that's only because his role has changed. He's still an extremely technical and able person. But I'm in the detail, whereas he's doing a high level management these days.
Yeah, naturally,
So we, still bouncing off, still chatting about tech, still chatting about how we're going to make these things work. Wow. It's a really good working relationship that gave us a good foundation.
What do you you obviously now, because of your position, from you've been in it for a long time, what would you say are good traits for a manager, a technical manager in a tech company? Like, do you think there's any particular traits that you've seen or that you try to display that you think this is what you need to have as a technical manager?
I think I'm amazed at how much the people skills are far more important in some ways than the technical skills. Like, you got to have good technical skills. But you're never going to get to that level unless you do have good technical skills, or at least you'd hope not. But the people skills are where it really changes. It's that movement from I'm going to build something to I'm going to lead people building things. And that's really where my teaching career has massively helped. So one of the things in teaching that I think is really interesting is they tell you when you're training, if you ask a child a question, then give them time to think, to answer. Because a lot of people, they'll ask a question, and if they don't get what feels like fairly instant feedback, they'll then ask another question or jump in or try to guide. And there's this thing where if you extend the thinking time you give somebody from 3 seconds to 5 seconds, you'll get 50% more answers.
Whoa.
Which is a really interesting thing. And so taking some of that stuff to teaching, from teaching to leadership is a really important part. You ask somebody something, they weren't necessarily expecting that question, give them a chance, and don't mind leaving a bit of quiet for them to think and come back to you and give you that answer. I think that's one of the things that's really helped. And also, I don't believe in like the strongman leader. I think you need to be really generous, really patient where you can. Obviously, I'm only a human, so I don't get it right all the time, depending on how much pressure I'm under. But I try to. And I'm always very generous with praise, really generous with thanks. Make sure that people know I appreciate the work that they do. Especially when sometimes you're going to need people to go above and beyond. You want them to know that you do appreciate what they do. So I'd say that learning to be kind and take the time for the people who you have on your team is a really, really important part of my role now, as opposed to when I was a developer, when I'd worry about the minutiae of code style and that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's, you know what, we were talking about this the other day, and just people don't remember how busy you were, or you know how like, I don't know, maybe even how technical you are or whatever, but they do remember like the time you spent with them and the way you made them feel and all that sort of thing. And it's but I think as you get busier, like you said there, the more pressure that's put on you, it's hard to sit with yourself and go, right, geez, I need to make sure that I'm doing all that. I think that the more pressure that's on you, the more stressed out you are, the harder it is to remember that you need to be that stone, that rock that's...
Yeah, I think one of my favorite quotes is about that you make the weather in the room. And I think that's a really important part of reflecting on yourself and getting better in leadership roles, whether it's technical, whether it's educational, whether it's anything, is if you go into a room with a face like a slapped ass, can I say ass?
Yeah, go on. Yeah. Fuck it.
Then people are gonna respond to that and behave accordingly. And I think when you go into a room, like we actually had an issue this morning, came up with our overnight promotion stuff. The question is, are you going in there to appoint blame and tell somebody you should have done this? Or are you going in to solve the problem, move on, make sure everybody knows what to do better next time, and be better in the future? And I think that's one of the great things about working at VP and the culture we've created, is it's always been about just how can we be better? And again, being generous when things go wrong, being patient when things go wrong, and taking it calmly and just moving through the issue, working the problem as opposed to asking whose fault it was. Yeah,
and I think lots of people know we work with you guys and recruit for you guys, and I think that's the feedback we get with anyone we place there or anyone we've had interview there. To get that immediately, even like a first stage interview, to get that level of, this is a place that's psychologically safe. This is a place that values outcome over ego. You know, I think a lot of companies strive to get to that point, and you've just done it fantastically well. And that's kind of what I wanted to dive into a little bit more is well, firstly, even talking about hiring and how you interview. what do you feel like the do's and don'ts of hiring for technical roles?
Oh.
That was a really big question, but I think you guys do it really well.
So I think one of the things is, because obviously we sort of started from scratch with our department. So, and I was new to this sort of level of leadership role when I started. And so a lot of things have come from, let's just figure out how we want to do it. So, for example, somebody said, I need a job description. I was like, I've never written a job description before. How do you write a job description? So Google some stuff and you have a look around, and I thought about what I've been sent by recruiters in the past. And I thought, well, I don't like being sent just like a long list of requirements. I mean, that's okay. You get a good idea of what tech you'd be working with and potentially what you've been doing. But what really sells me on a company is knowing how they work and what they care about and that sort of stuff. So I think you said my document I sent you over was a little odd for what you normally get, but it was like a list of articles and videos and stuff about our practices. And so, for example, there's some great domain-driven development videos which we always show people when they first arrive, and we put that in the pack. There's an article I wrote about how we built our website, because we did our own sort of rendering process and some, I'm going to say, I think it's quite clever stuff in there. Blow my own trumpet. And then we've got some stuff on our view on TDD and how it's maybe a little bit different to some of what goes on in the industry. And just things which I hope people took the time to read and engage with, even if they didn't choose to come and work for us. It'd be interesting for them in their practice to see how a particular company works and what they're interested in. And then, of course, you send a small list of, you'd be a .NET developer and we'd expect you to know about Git and all this other normal stuff. And I think, podcasts and things that we're interested in, that sort of stuff. So I think thinking about how you pitch your job, first of all, is very interesting. Is it marketing guff or is it about you as a company? And so that was my step one. And then I think for us, I suppose it's how do we then accept a candidate and think about proceeding to interview. And I think you raised a big point when I spoke to you a little while ago about how we don't really care what the companies are that they work for. My step one is we do have a take-home tech task, which obviously some people don't agree with and some people do, and there's a hoo-ha about it, but that's what we do. I want to know if somebody can code. And when that person's profile comes through to me, I'm going to look at two things. Is it junior, mid, or senior? Or what's the level? And then I never look at the CV first. The first thing I open is the code. And I'm going to try and figure out, okay, how do I rate this code against a person at that level and maybe what salary they want? And for example, if somebody wants to be a senior with a high salary and they're doing things like looping potentially 100 database calls in a row, well, then it's a no. If they don't know how to use an atomic transaction, then it's a no, like these core basics. And you'd be amazed how many like tech tasks you get through where they're just missing basic principles and yet are asking for like high mid, high senior titles and a lot of money. So yeah, for me, it's always, can they do the job? Will they do it to our standards? And code first. We've always had a put your code where your mouth is attitude. And so I guess that's why that's the most valuable thing to me in deciding whether to take somebody forwards. And then I'll go and have a look at the CV. And I'm never too bothered about what the companies are that they've worked for. The things that I'm interested in are what have they done? How much experience have they really had? Because it's no good having, say, 10 years of experience if it's the same experience 10 times. I'm looking for somebody who's built a few different things, is passionate about the products or projects that they've worked on. And that's how we work. I don't know whether that's that different to other hiring managers, but it's certainly what I've valued.
Well, I think the good thing is about, especially you specifically, is that you're always open to be challenged on things, and you're always open to have a discussion on things, and that might come from your philosophy degree or whatever, I don't know, your theology degree. And I think that's what it is. I think a lot of the time people are too wedded to their current process, and they get offended if you disagree with it or challenge it. Whereas I think someone like you're not that bothered. I mean, you are bothered, but it's more like if I said to you, I think I disagree with this, you'd be like, oh, okay, tell me why, and you'd have a conversation with me about it rather than.
I agree with that. Actually, I suppose that goes back to the leadership question from earlier. One of the things I'd probably add to that is one of my most hated phrases is somebody asks why somebody's doing something, and they go, "Oh, Dave told me to."
Oh, right, okay.
And and yeah, because I really believe in being challenged and being questioned and being open to it. So if somebody doesn't agree with something, then I'll be generous with that time, take the time to go through, discuss it, and at the end of it, what I want them to understand is where I'm coming from. And there's a technical reason. Usually, I can't think of anything where it's ever just been pure preference. It's usually founded in some sort of technical reason from when I've been reading some documentation on the toilet or whatever it is, as everybody does.
Oh yeah.
And I think if you aren't open to justifying your point of view or open to being able to fight your corner and explain yourself, then shouldn't be leading. And similar when it comes to recruitment, almost everything, every problem that you solve, might be a people problem, might be a technical problem, but you should have a good reason why you thought what you thought, why you did what you did. And if somebody thinks you're wrong, be open to that and then figure out if you want to adapt or not.
Yeah, do you think a lot of it comes from, I read something ages ago, and I think it was maybe Tim Ferriss or someone like that, and it's amazing what you can get done if you're not obsessed with being right all the time. I think it's so amazing. Like if as soon as you give up the whole ego thing of like I need to be right, and you let that go, it's just mega what comes in.
There's an interesting story about some factory workers, and some people were studying productivity, and they noticed that when the managers were in the room, productivity dropped. And when the managers weren't in the room, productivity went up. So what they did was they put a curtain around the workers doing their work, and they would not allow the managers inside the curtain. So the managers couldn't see what the workers were doing and how they were doing it. Because when the workers were by themselves, they had their own way of working that they developed, but that wasn't company process. And so by allowing them to work in their own way and giving them that safe space to do it, the factory saw like massive gains in productivity. And I think that's a real lesson in don't be wedded to being right or like making somebody follow the steps you think. Be open to their challenge. Have a look at what they've come up with and see if it's good or not, and look maybe for more outcome than policy, I suppose. And that's how we work. And I guess going back to the put your code where your mouth is thing, if you think you can do something better, show me, and then we'll take it from there.
And just on that, and again, I guess going back to the growth of VP in the team right now, the structure of your team, can you run us through that and how the team's structured and how many people is there now?
I think we're about 85 now.
Nice.
Leon will probably tell me I'm wrong.
I was going to say,
but last time I checked with him, it was like 85 people. So, but we've come a long way because it originally started with literally just me and Leon in a room with a couple of laptops.
That's wild. So just going back to that first, you two in a room with laptops. When was like, right, we need to hire someone? When was what made you make that decision?
So, I mean, to be fair, Leon had pre-prepared like his crack team, like his A team.
Nice.
And we were just waiting for those guys to come on board. So there was me, Ali, Paul, Leon, who were like the core team at the beginning. And really enjoyed working in that environment. And that came very quickly. So I think it was about 6 to 8 weeks, and then Ali and Paul arrived. And we were just working in this tiny office with the four of us. And we developed our first product. So our first product was about Leon had spotted that there was like difficulty with understanding our stock levels into the future and ordering stock into the future. So he made a forecasting system that would figure out our stock position in sort of where we'd be in 6 months. Because obviously, if you're buying a bunch of stuff from China, there's a huge lead time. So when you purchase it, first of all, you need to be planning ahead. And second of all, you don't need to know what your stock position is today for any given product. You need to know what your stock position is going to be in 3 months' time. So how do you start predicting that? And then you can use those calculations to make a decision. And it was taken, like, our business is amazing. That, like, the way that people work and how hard they work and the things that they've done and how it's been built up is absolutely incredible. But in this particular case, it was taking them quite a long time to get to the point when they could figure out exactly what the stock would be. So it was difficult to order from all of our factories and all of our supply routes. And this thing essentially was an algorithm that figured out what the stock position would be on the day that you wanted the stock to arrive, and therefore how much should you order for that day.
Wow.
And instead of it taking, say, 6 weeks to get around all of our suppliers, in theory it could be done sort of in a day. We were working towards that sort of product, and then just the four of us in this office, and then we moved on to another office and took on a bunch of people. Unfortunately, late rooms fell over, and it was at that time that we got some really good people from Aircom on board. It's like just a really, really good team. We were just working in this 10-man office with no windows, with 12 of us in it.
Whoa. Pretty romantic though, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's
nice and close. I think there was a good filtration system. It was okay.
Wow.
And after the pandemic hit, we all went home, and we've never really returned to like full office working after that. We just slowly expanded. It was interesting at the beginning because obviously when we were brought on board, the business was established. There was a lot of older tech and a team maintaining that over in India. You need to give them a lot of respect, because although the tech was old and quite dated in its approach, and we certainly wouldn't have chosen to write it that way, it was running a £200 million business. It's fantastic what they achieved. But it wasn't really something that could scale in the long term. So it was quite soon that we took over the whole software estate. We set to modernizing it. First thing was to get it into the cloud. And then there came a point when we decided, right, we're going to replace things like product information management. We're going to replace the website. We're going to replace, some other core pieces of business software like stock management and all that sort of stuff. And that was what we started during that first remote working years. That started to drive the sales part of the business, to improve that and replace it all, which was quite exciting, especially as we're a build rather than buy company.
Right. What does that? Oh, you mean like it's all custom?
Most of our software is bespoke.
Wow.
We have very few bought-in products. Like, I can think of maybe 2 or 3. And those tend to be the ones we have most problems with. Our internal software works really well thanks to our wonderful test team and the developers who sit down and think really carefully about what they're doing and how they're building it. Our team's wonderful, deserve a lot of praise. I think a lot of companies sort of think, well, why don't you buy stuff in? I think that's a really interesting question. But there's two problems to that sometimes. If you buy in, for example, say a product information management system, it seems obvious to buy it because you can get a really complete product straight away and it's all there. But also you've got vendor lock-in.
Okay.
And where's your data sat? Well, it's in someone else's cloud somewhere. So you might have latency issues, for example. But at the same time, then, they're between you and your customers. So if they choose to hike their prices by double or 3 times or 4 times, then how do you cope with that? Like, are you going to be able to migrate to another PIM or whatever? So you're stuck. Also, you've got an element of the ability to drive change in it. You know, if it's not a feature they want to build, you can't do it. Whereas somebody imagines something in our world and then it gets made. Wow. And so there's some really cool stuff that we do. Our PIM has been designed really well, so it's able to handle sort of infinite relationships and infinite relationship types between products and groups. Recently, we've been building something about content, so we can make more inspirational content on the website. We're starting to do things like AI feature extraction from our products and build that in as well, so that we can, all the legacy stuff that we've got, you know, like 16 years worth of product descriptions, we can start to extract information from it. So there's really cool things that you can do when you take control of your ecosystem.
And just on, and I want to, there's something else I want to go into on that stuff, because I know, I mean, there's so many interesting things that you guys do at VP, which probably people don't know about. So I know that domain-driven design is something that you're very passionate about, and you did a talk at the Manchester Web Meetup that we hosted, and you did another one at Arc Manchester, didn't you?
Architect in Manchester.
Architect in Manchester. All around it. I'm not technical, which I you obviously understand. But I was hoping you could explain it the way you explained it to me previously about what domain-driven design is, because I think it's interesting and it'd be good to get a non-technical explanation of what it is.
Okay. So step one is, there are kind of 2 parts to it, and in particular about how we code. But step 1, I suppose, is understanding your data. So your domain, we're referring to your business domain, is all about understanding the data that you have and how you're going to represent it. So for us, we would sit down, for example, and we'd design our database tables out or our data structures out at the beginning, and we would give everything names and cover the core concepts. And one of the most important parts of that is you're trying to make sure that you're speaking the same language in your code and your data that your business is speaking. So sometimes that means going to them and introducing new ideas. So for us, for example, one of the things we have is holdings and offerings as opposed to just products. And a holding is the thing we have in a warehouse that we dispatch out, and an offering is the thing that we sell on the website. And that for us was a key piece of vocab that we needed to introduce with our business. And now that's a normal part of our business parlance. And then once you've kind of got your data side, I guess this is the subject of the talk, it's about how you then apply that into code. Because at the moment, what a lot of businesses do in how they approach their coding is they kind of have a controller layer, which is the thing, say, your web browser talks to. And then they have a domain layer. And what they do is they make this really dumb, just basic properties and objects and all that sort of stuff. And then they have this application or business layer that essentially does everything else. And for us, we try to then separate that out, because one of the things that you need to do is to reduce the amount of responsibility in your code to make it as single responsibility as possible. But for us, that meant moving the business logic that sat in our application layer or our business layer into our domain. So if you had an order as opposed to having just things happen to the order, you would ask the order to do something. So you'd have a menu that said, update the delivery address. And so then that method gets called with the new delivery address, and the order sorts out how it's related to its other things, like, for example, its deliveries, its items, all that sort of stuff. And it would then go and update those properties for you, and then you would save that to your database. So the key part of our implementation detail is putting the behavior in the same place as you have the data, instead of having behavior happen to the data, I suppose.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
I was worried I was going to fail that one.
No, it makes sense. And it's, that's the thing I love about software engineering in general, or engineering in general, I guess. It's everything's practical and pragmatic. And it kind of, once you cut through all the code part of it, if you're a non-techie person, it all kind of just does make sense if you remove the code away from it. And what about some of the other stuff that you've been up to at VP recently? Any cool projects that have been going on that you can tell us about? If it's top secret, you don't have to cover it.
So I think one of the most interesting ones recently has been our analytics project. So we've we wanted to get better data, basically, and especially giving the database, the dev team access to it, and having it that bit cleaner. So as all businesses do, we use things like Google Analytics and Adobe Analytics and all this sort of stuff. But we realized that there were gaps in that, because for that, you're only getting things which work in a browser. So you're missing actually a whole bunch of traffic, which you'll never, ever see. And you only get access to things which the browser lets you see. So, for example, if somebody has an ad blocker installed, you won't get any information out of it at all. And obviously then there's GDPR and all that sort of stuff that we have to worry about. And although I'm going to say we now have access to information, it's all GDPR compliant and all that legal stuff that's very important. And I spent a long time sat down with our data protection officer, making sure we approach this, not just in terms of capturing a lot of information, but ethically, making sure it was done well and reasonably and didn't invade anybody's privacy. So what we did was we moved our analytics onto our server side. So rather than waiting for a user to open their browser or open their phone and come to our website, we started to record the requests that were sent for pages, or the requests that were sent for pieces of data, like, for example, our basket and stuff like that. So now we could see everything, every single page request, because you don't get the HTML and all the stuff that makes up the page unless you come to the server. So then we started to see really interesting stuff that we couldn't see before. So a really good example was the WhatsApp previewer links. So when you send a link for a product on your phone, so me and Jenna buy a new bathroom, then I might send her the products I like. And then because WhatsApp in that message, you'll see, oh, it's got this image, it's got this slug, and it's got some other information that it loads up, whenever you send anybody a link for anything. And that's because your phone has now sent a request to the page and pulled some information out for these previewer information that it's going to display. So now we can actually see through this user agent, because it identifies itself as on WhatsApp. You can now see how many products are being shared on WhatsApp, which is amazing. And similar, there's like a Facebook version and there's email versions and all this sort of stuff. And so we've got a good idea of, say, social activity on our products, not just people who viewed what product and when they viewed it. And then we found all the people who were scraping us. So there's some really interesting ones, like we found OpenAI all over our website. So they've got their scraper that comes and pulls all the information because they're downloading the internet to turn into ChatGPT. So you could see all of that happening. We can see not just Google coming to our site, but all the different types of Google bots. So the ad bots, the actual crawler bot for the search indexing, the shopping bots, etc. And there's just a whole massive wealth of information that you can now start to analyze and understand by essentially just moving the point where you start logging the data that you want to see onto the server side and behind those page requests.
Wow. So, yeah. So what does that mean for you as a business? That you have a deeper understanding of how people are looking at your products?
Yeah. So obviously we're working now. So the system's relatively recent.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still working on our business processes around it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're just making people aware of the information that we have and trying to provide it to them. I think sometimes you start off with, well, what's possible?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what we're at the moment is we've seen what we can collect. And now we're asking what's possible to do with this. And we're interested in doing things like driving better personalization experiences, better customer experiences. It gives you a different view on the products when it's things like shares, because you'll have an idea of, say, what order our listing page is in versus what people are genuinely interested in.
Right.
Because it's not always necessarily the top 3 products that are being shared. And we potentially want to have a look at, I don't know whether I should say this, but like disrupting our order a little bit. Because you get a positive feedback loop when you do a listing page. It's because you put the products at the top because they sell the most. But why do they sell the most? Well, because they're at the top of your listings.
Oh.
So when you've now got an external data source about, for example, understanding all the views that say came from Google Shopping, the products that are really shared, the products that people click on versus the products that they see, you can start to apply some data science now to think about what's actually best for what's the most optimized version of this? Should we continue on because we've always done it like this, or should we have a look at alternative ways of considering, for example, the listing order or search order on our pages? So we're right at the beginning of an exciting journey. Those are some of the things I'd like us to consider. But obviously, as a business, you have many priorities going on at once. This is just a small part.
Yeah, it's again talking about like the practicality of things and the pragmatism of things. That all makes complete sense. And why every business doesn't do that, I don't know. Or maybe they do, I don't know. But where did the idea come from? Was that again just from the tech team?
I mean, like our business has always been interested in data. The marketing team really care about data. They spend a lot of time analyzing, for example, their Google Analytics.
Sure.
I had a chat with Liam. It seemed like a really good idea. So we went with it. And,
love it.
You know, and as happens with quite a few things, it's about finding what the art of the possible is. How do you shift away just from looking at it the same old way to a new way? How do you think about alternative approaches? And that's what we're about a lot. We've never like chased new and shiny. I think that's very important. Sometimes it sounds like that because we're doing some cool stuff. What we're looking for is like really good implementations, really, really solid approaches. And everything has got like a risk management side, a business goal, I suppose. And we knew that if we sat down and actually started to collect this information, we could produce a really, really rich source. So there's huge value in that. You know, like, as I say, data's the new oil. So
yeah. What and because we've spoken a lot about critical thinking, and this is going to, again, quite a big question, but how does one become a critical thinker? I'm really sorry for asking that question on the podcast, but
I honestly don't know the answer to that. I think you just have to be very curious. I think so. I kind of got like a view as to how, say, developers grow. I do think everybody sort of reaches a level at some point, but it's almost a choice as to how far you take it. So at the beginning, I think you don't really know anything. So you start off with just knowledge gathering. And this might be, say, your junior dev level or your person aiming to be a junior dev. And so that'll just be knowledge gathering. Like, how does the syntax work? How do I do a for loop? How do I maybe solve this problem? And as you gain knowledge, then you start to gain a bit of experience. And the experience then helps you make slightly better decisions or approach things differently or better and that sort of stuff. After you've got a bit of experience, you start to develop judgment because you find there's 5 different ways of doing the same thing. Which do you pick? So your judgment then starts to come in because you realize there's trade-offs to this approach versus that approach. And building judgment is when you're starting to get towards maybe your more senior level and that sort of thing. But then the next stage after that becomes having a vision. And I think that process from not just knowing what the trade-offs are, but being able to think, this is what I could really do if we applied a whole bunch of these things together. And that's when you can start to create like a vision for a product or a vision for a system, or, I mean, it probably applies everywhere, a vision for a business, you know. And I think a lot of critical thinking probably just comes from working through that process towards how far along it are you. Just somebody who's knowledge gathering? Are you experienced? Are you able to make good judgments? And then kind of start to go, do you know what? We could do this, and here's a vision for what the future looks like. Yeah, that's kind of my view on it anyway.
I like that. Yeah, it's a good theory, and I think, I guess, does a part of it come from being self-aware?
Yeah, I think reflective practice is a really, really important thing. Whether it's looking back at how you've dealt with people, or whether it's looking back at what you've built. I think actually there's a really important part for developers to play, in that traditionally, like, the market's always been about where you go somewhere for a couple of years, then you want a pay rise, so you move.
Yeah.
But I think there's a real value to staying somewhere and finding out if you made the right decision. Because if you, especially like some of the complex systems we've built, so the PIM that we've built, we started off with a really good vision of what we wanted. And I think, as having now worked with it for 2-3 years, it's really clear we made some really good decisions, and it's a really good product. There are some other things where I think we're probably still, we're looking back at some of the choices we made and thinking we could have done that better. And I think, especially, I suppose this goes back to the hiring, looking for somebody, it's not wrong to job hop, because you get different experiences from job hopping and seeing lots of different ways of doing things. And it's maybe good at the start of a career, but for somebody who's going to come into a leadership position, what you might want to do is have a look at, right, well, did they deal with their problems? The system they created, did they maintain it? Did they see how it grew in the future? Could they explain to you where it started and what it became, and know whether they made good choices at the beginning and how that then truly played out? So there's a huge amount of value in sticking around and seeing the outcomes that you create of the things that you create, I suppose.
Love that. Yeah. And I guess while we're talking about problems and seeing the outcome of things, and again, a question I always like to ask is, what is the hardest problem you've solved?
I think definitely our search system was the most challenging thing I've done. On a couple of counts. The first is expectations of search. You search all over the place, and of course Google have done it really well in the past, maybe not so much now with all those sponsored links, but we're so spoilt in terms of the quality of free things on the internet. And so everybody thinks, search is easy. You just tap in the thing you want and you look for that word in all your product names and you return the things where it matches. And it does seem like it should be that easy. And I think when I went into it, I probably underestimated how complex it was in our space. So step one, well, how do you match? Let's say that we're looking at the word shower, but then somebody types in showers or somebody types in showering. How do you now match that back to shower? So suddenly I had to learn about a whole bunch of natural language processing tools. And the one to solve this particular one is actually fairly simple. It's called stemming. And you stem the word. So shower, showering, and shower all get reduced back down to the same root word of, well, let's call it shower. And so then you can match that to your product, provided that your product's got a good naming convention and contains the word shower. But then start to think about, say, toilet, and how many different products there are around toilets. Because you've got your toilet roll holder, you've got your toilet brush, you've got your toilet flush plate, toilet cistern, like all these different things. And suddenly I was finding that I'd type in the word toilet and I've got all these products come back, which are perfect matches, which just make no sense to my search and my intent. So now I've got to find a way to reduce out that noise. But the only input I've got is a one-word string. So how do you suddenly go, no, get rid of everything else, get rid of everything else? And what if they did something like introduce other words, crapper, throne, John? How are you going to then get rid of all that other noise? So our product domain is obviously quite complicated, and there's loads of satellite products to our core products. And so we started to build a hierarchy or taxonomy of products where we were grouping into separate sections. And then we realized we need a way to know which group to look at. So we've developed an in-house AI model for classifying searches to specific product groups, which stuff like toilets actually fairly simple. And then you go and look at the toilets group, but then you realize how many like double meaning searches there are. So for us, a very interesting one is double basin. Because with double basin, well, you do have, it's not a basin actually, it's a piece of furniture. It's a vanity unit with two basins on the top most of the time. So you need to make sure that you're working through a whole bunch of AI things and you train this model to understand your view, your product domain, your business domain. And I personally sat down and labeled 10,000 instances of searches.
10,000?
Yeah, I sat down at my kitchen table each night going, oh, kill me.
Oh my God.
We tried to do it with ChatGPT. That was very interesting. ChatGPT only had about a 40% accuracy rate in what I was hoping. So obviously with that, you can't trust it. So then it's just me doing this.
So if anything's wrong with it now, it's your fault?
Yes. Yeah, I frequently take the blame. It's okay, I've got broad shoulders. But obviously, sometimes it's hard for people to appreciate kind of how difficult this problem is because it seems so obvious. You ask it for something small, and it's supposed to just give you that thing. And how can it not know your intent? That's where we use this classification stuff to then get you down to that product set. After you've done that, well, hang on, we've got a whole bunch of different types of searches. So, for example, I think shower caddy is a really interesting one. I had a look at how many different ways you can search for a shower caddy, and I came up with about 25,000. And although I've labeled 10,000 search instances, we have 5.2 million unique searches have gone through our website since we deployed our search, which is just incredible to think about how you expand something out and generalize to that level. But you'll get searches like you'll need to target different places because our data has been built up over 20 years. Victorian Plumbing's a relatively old business. We've had all sorts of different product naming conventions. Product descriptions have changed in that time. We have some attribute data that's in lots of different formats and in lots of different fields. So for example, if you're going to identify a color, that's not always in the product name. Sometimes it's in a variant name, sometimes it's in the color attribute, and sometimes you only find it in the description. But you can't be searching every single field for every single type of word. And you want to do it slightly differently because, for example, if somebody searches for brushed brass, well, what if I don't actually have any brushed brass things? I mean, obviously we do, but what if I don't? So I would do something like say, well, it has to be brass because that's the most important part. If I don't have brushed, then I'll allow that to be dropped. So we identify the finish and we identify the color through a second AI model, which again adds a label with 10,000 instances, which recognizes entities. And so then we can pull out our brands, we can pull out our colors, color modifiers, we can pull out keywords, all this different type of stuff. And then that targets different fields. And then because maybe the color field is different on a toilet as opposed to the bath, like you might have put in the attribute bath color as opposed to toilet color or toilet seat color or whatever it is. So we've then built a system as well, so it's hierarchical. So depending on the classification, depends how it targets different fields to get back the right thing that you're after. So it's impossible to understand like how much work goes into building like a really, really good search. And we're still working on it and continue to work on it. It's because we'll always find new things coming up and new and interesting things coming about. And then finally, once you've done that, you've then got to order these products, not just in terms of relevance, but in terms of what do I want to sell, what's in stock, where do we make the most margin? So things like the most important thing is to get products that are in stock to the top of the list.
Yeah.
So obviously that's a core boost. So now that rescores things based on stock levels and all that sort of stuff. And these are all like layers of things that fit over the top and target different spaces and all that sort of stuff.
I think anyone now who's on Victorian Plumbing's website and is looking for a new toilet is going to really appreciate how hard you've worked to get that in front of them. Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. So they all just have different weightings, basically. Like there's because that's how ChatGPT works, right? Like different words have different weightings.
So that's a completely different sort of thing. So that's getting into vector embeddings.
God.
And you can make a whole podcast on vector.
Oh God, okay.
So ours is a keyword-based search. Right. I have had a look at embeddings because I think that's very interesting because that's where you don't look for the word, you translate the word into like so it's like a point in space. So this is a very interesting topic because what happens is, just imagine it's a 3D graph of X, Y, Z points. And what it'll do is it'll go, this word is used with this other word. So toilet is used with roll and holder. And so it will start to cluster words. And so this will get this XYZ point and roll might have this XYZ point and holder will get this XYZ point. But then you've got soap associated with it and soap's over here. So it might drag holder a little bit closer to that. And so what it's doing is it's creating an understanding through like a numerical representation of words. And it's not an XYZ like 3 dimensions of space. You're talking about 1,500 dimensions of space that it builds, and it produces this crazy array of coordinates of things and things that words are related to each other, not just by what their numerical point in space is, but also what their gradient relationship to another word is. So there's a really interesting one about how you've got you can do maths with words. So and you can build in social bias. So for example, if you were to download the internet and take all the words and you associate the word doctor to man, and doctor might be in this point here, man's in this point here, and there's like a line between the two, like a gradient line that you follow. Now, if you take the word woman and you follow the same gradient line, the same distance, you'll end up at nurse. And this is social bias built into the maths of the words. And you can do other things, like you can say, right, well, if I have the word king and I take away the word man and I add the word woman, like obviously these numerical arrays, you'll end up approximately at the word queen. And so that's how that sort of stuff fits together. And we have looked at including that in search, but it is quite computationally expensive. So it has the potential to massively slow down your search.
Right.
Also then, how you apply, say, scoring levels for your sales rates, your stock levels, all that sort of stuff. It's a complete different scoring system. So you could do this semantic re-ranking, but then end up with all your out-of-stock products at the top. And then that's not good commercially. So there's a lot of things to consider before you bring in something like vector embeddings. And also, when you build that word map of coordinates, the word coordinates, then you need to appreciate how did that get built and what was the information source. So, for example, a lot of the transformer models, which this is based on, say, the BERT ones that you can download from Hugging Face, they come with Google Books and Wikipedia, and that's what they were built from. So a huge amount of information, like this massive collection of like thousands of unpublished books. Do they know anything about bathrooms? Not really. So to just take that and say embed the vectors, it isn't necessarily going to work for our search. And I've sat down and quizzed ChatGPT about, say, slotted versus unslotted wastes, and trying to have a conversation about ChatGPT and see if it will understand whether I can use my basin waste in my shower or if it can tell the difference. And you realize like it's missing some core information. So we could experiment with it and try using, say, ChatGPT based embeddings in our search. But if it doesn't have that concept that a slotted waste doesn't work on a shower, then somewhere in my 5.2 million search terms, is there going to be a gap if I did it using embeddings? And how will I find it? That's a very difficult problem for us to solve at the moment, is how do you find genuine issues amongst this vast sea of data of like all these potential searches? So embeddings are an interesting space, but how they get applied commercially and like all these companies contacting me saying, we can do AI search for you, there's a lot to consider before you go jumping into that. And of course, as well, if we were to use, for example, ChatGPT, that's brilliant, but what's its latency like? If I'm asking it for this search embedding to give me its coordinate map for the words it's embedding, how long is it going to take? A customer is waiting for me to get an embedding, and then I've got to send that embedding to my search cluster, and then I've got to wait for the response and parse it and send it all back. I mean, you don't want people waiting 5, 10, 20 seconds for ChatGPT to get back to you with an embedding, and they're sat there between us and our customers going back to that buy versus build process. So, I guess that's turned into a whole tangent of vector embedding stuff, but it's a very interesting topic where you can do some very interesting things, like, for example, renter-friendly shelf is a great example for a search, which would be very difficult to do with keyword, but sentiment and vector embeddings would do very well. But there's a trade-off. First of all, how often does somebody search for a renter-friendly shelf?
What is that?
One which is
renter. Oh, sorry. Right. Got it.
You don't have to drill into the wall,
like a sticky on sort of thing.
Yeah, stick it. Yeah, like that would be great for vector embeddings. But how often is it really searched, and how often does somebody just look for sticky shelf?
Yeah.
something like that.
Deposit-friendly shelf.
That sort of thing. And so you don't necessarily always need all that tech, which is that same thing coming back to we're always focused on implementation, always focused on like quality. It's not about get the new and shiny because the new and shiny looks great, but you're going to have to make some trade-offs. And are you really using all of that as well? Yeah.
Wow. How do you not just go home and just collapse?
I told you at the beginning I'm a massive geek who just likes to
just get through the door. You sit the door open. You just open the door. Jen goes morning, and you just.
No, I go in and I start chatting to her about all the different things I've done, and she regrets it.
Oh, that was funny. Okay, well, yeah. I mean, there's definitely need a follow-up podcast after this to talk about that sort of stuff. But you need to go away and do your research before you go into it, and we'll do a whole new thing in like 12 months' time. Yeah. Wow. Okay. I'm conscious of time for you, but last question. I'll leave you alone. If you were to recommend a book, podcast, publication, qualification, anything along that vein, what would you recommend?
So I've got one of my favourite books. I think is very interesting, and typically for me, it's kind of techie. It's a book called "This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends." And it's by an author who worked for the New York Times. I think it's Nicole Pearl something. Damn it, I forgot.
We'll put it in the subtitles.
Yeah. And she was a lead reporter on cybersecurity and digital espionage for the New York Times for about 10 years.
Whoa!
And it's a crazy book about that sort of world, and it makes you realize just how scarily fragile things can be. It's very interesting because since our company listed, one of the things we've noticed is how much we come under attack.
Whoa!
So I went. We've come under attack a few times, and we're not concerned. Everything's very secure. Everything's very secure. So, for example, I went to a conference in February, and I wake up on day one of the conference and I realize our website's under attack from Russian hackers.
Whoa!
It's called a fuzzing attack. It's a very normal sort of thing that happens to a lot of websites, where they're just throwing mud at you and hoping something sticks. And our website, I've been through like these millions of requests and looked at all different types of stuff that they're doing, and none of it matches to the way our website works, because our website's very custom. So we're not concerned about it. But when you have a look at this, like read this book, it makes you realize how you can follow a huge number of like security best practices. But if you've built your thing on this framework provided by .NET, and .NET leave a security issue in there, then you're stuffed, because you've done everything you can do. It's not your code that's the problem, it's the framework. And a lot of these attacks that come in are, say, like an HTTP vulnerability, but I'm not in control of HTTP vulnerabilities. I build on top of that. And it talks about all these different things that have gone on in the world of espionage, like the Stuxnet virus and all this sort of stuff. And it's just very eye-opening as to like what's going on in the tech world and the NSA and like the politics that goes with it as well. So when a country chooses to reveal that it's had access to somebody else's power network and all that sort of stuff, and what that means, and high-level politics of all of it. So it's really interesting. And if you're interested in security as well, which I also spent a lot of time reading about because it's very important, there's a good podcast called Security This Week.
Okay.
And that's very interesting. It's three guys, two of which are security experts, and one is like a history of being a Microsoft .NET developer. And they are trying to put security into layman's terms and talk about the security issues each week. So another example of like the framework one is there was this big issue with what's called Log4j.
Mm-hmm.
And Log4j is a logging system that a huge number of Java applications use. And when that came out, you could go onto a Minecraft server and you could hack the Minecraft server through Log4j. Now, Minecraft have built perfectly, nothing wrong with what they've done, but they're using this package, and that package has the vulnerability. So that's how you hack it, because you've built on top of it. And so security this week share all this stuff. They share all like the different security issues that have come out, and it's like a little reminder sometimes to update your packages. And they also have a feature where sometimes if you're telling people about security, you can't get away from the fact that you're also not just telling people how to secure themselves, but you're telling criminals what to do.
Exactly,
so they call it criminal career advice and have a little jingle. So it's an entertaining listen.
Wow, what an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
Oh God. Okay. So you've ended it on a terrifying note, but look, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an hour, you know.
Oh,
over an hour.
Yeah.
So I think you might have meetings, but look, great conversation. Always love speaking to you. Amazing stuff going on at VP, and yeah, excited to see what's going on there in the next 6 to 12 months.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll catch you on the next one.